Miigwech. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. And I'm going to talk about Wataynikaneyap. Wataynikaneyap is a transmission project that the 22 First Nations are in partnership to bring the grid to the remote First Nations. And so before I get into the actual presentation, our elders have helped us name the project. When we started out, we asked our elders to see if they could name this project that we're working on, and they came up with Wataynikaneyap. The dialect might be different, so don't get mad. That's what we were given. So before I start, I think you need to see a video of one of their work in advancing this project, telling the story, the situation of our communities. And I'm going to get John to show that video.
This is no ordinary trip for John Cutfeet.
We're leaving from Sulakad, and then we'll go up to KI. It's 269 miles.
He's a member of Big Trout Lake First Nation, or KI for short, a community of about 1,000 people, 580 kilometers north of Thunder Bay.
And we'll go to the community hall, and then we'll do the Wataynikaneyap presentation.
Today he's on his way up to meet with members of his community to talk about a power project that has the potential to revitalize 16 remote First Nations communities in northwestern Ontario.
This is a project that's owned by 20 First Nations who have gotten together to say we want to develop this transmission line and to be able to be eventual owners of the transmission line. So we're looking at trying to connect the 16 remote communities who are currently on diesel onto the provincial power grid. Right now, communities are at capacity and they're unable to build any more houses, do any infrastructure, and so that's what we're trying to change.
It's clear this is no ordinary power project. For the first time in Ontario, First Nations communities are in the driver's seat. They are majority owners of the project and have partnered with experienced industry leaders.
This is precedent-setting in Canada.
Jerry Vananetti is with Renewable Energy Systems Canada, who've partnered with Fortis Ontario and the 20 First Nations communities to form the licensed transmission company called Wataynikaneyap Power.
First Nations have responsibilities for their land, and they want to take responsibility for their economic future. And they've created a partnership here, and we've joined their partnership to help them realize their dream of economic self-determination.
The roots of this power project really began with First Nations around 2008, 2009.
Scott Hawkes is president of Wataynikaneyap Power and VP of Corporate Services for Fortis Ontario.
This power project is unique, I would say, from the outset, in that it's been run by First Nations, for First Nations. They've been working and investing in this project up to this point, and they now need a transmitter to bring it to the finish line. And it's a true partnership.
Spearheading this initiative on behalf of the First Nations communities is Margaret Kenekwanach,
Good morning, people.
Good morning, Margaret.
chair of Wataynikaneyap Power.
I'm not aware of any major development or infrastructure development that's currently happening where 20 First Nations are in partnership and agreeing to work together on a development initiative like this. And we got to start moving together on these initiatives and working towards building that capacity and creating that hope for the future.
Hope on a massive scale that has the ability to define the very future of these communities.
It's a huge project. There's 1,800 kilometers of transmission lines that have to be built. It's a $1.3 billion project. It's a very large transmission project.
John Cutfeet regularly makes presentations on behalf of Wataynikaneyap Power to the different communities as part of an ongoing engagement process to get the community's feedback on where those transmission lines should go.
I'd like to say thank you for allowing us to come into your community. I just want to share a little bit about the project called Wataynikaneyap.
You know, not having a connection to the grid is something that I don't think people from Southern Ontario can relate to. Things like water quality, security of food supply, and the ability to have a home or build a new home are all at stake here. That doesn't even include economic development.
Over 200 kilometers southwest of Big Trout Lake is another community relying on diesel. Barry Strachan is manager of public works for a tribal council that encompasses 4 of these communities living off the grid.
We're at the airport. This is where the North Spirit Lake diesel generating station is located. Over my shoulder is the storage facility required to produce power in this community for 1 year. It's roughly 800,000 liters of fuel stored behind us. So that's 26 tanker truck loads of fuel that had to come over the ice road 300 kilometers from Red Lake to reach this site. I'm not sure what the carbon footprint of this plant is. It's huge. This is the dirtiest way by far to make power that I'm aware of, that I've ever seen.
Dirty power that's also prohibitively expensive.
$1 million a year is just a straight cash outlay, leaving this community to go to some petroleum company to purchase the fuel here. This community is often teetering on the verge of bankruptcy as a result of the reliance on this product behind me.
He says it's expensive and unreliable.
It fails at the most inopportune times. 2 years ago, we had a power outage for 10 days during the Christmas holiday.
Back at Big Trout Lake at their diesel storage facility, Jeffrey McKay, a band counselor, says it's not just unreliable, it's also maxed out.
We're not able to connect any more buildings, or we can't really build any new houses. Even if we build them, we can't hook them up.
This inability to build new homes means that many are condemned to live in conditions that most of us would find unacceptable, including Jeff's own sister, Edna.
And the living conditions are so poor. This is how the people are packed into small rooms when there's overcrowding. It's almost every house has that problem in this community. This one, it should be condemned already. But still, we don't have a choice. People have to live in these kind of conditions because we don't have enough homes in the community.
Outside Edna's home, the problem comes into stark focus.
That building there, it was supposed to be a restaurant. And they can't hook it up because there's not enough power. So it's just been standing there maybe a year and a half already. So that's just how it is. Even if we put up new buildings, we can't hook them up.
That's the reality of life in these northern communities, and why they're so desperate for a change that will allow them to take charge of their future.
It can't happen soon enough. There is a sense of urgency. You know, best case scenario, we're looking at probably 10 years before the grid will get to this community. But it's a light at the end of the tunnel versus, you know, staying reliant on this equipment, staying reliant on government to fund upgrades to the system. Yeah, it's going to be a huge impact for North Spirit Lake once the grid gets here.
I think a lot of communities are putting a lot of faith and a lot of confidence into Wataynikaneyap Power.
Wataynikaneyap, I feel, will pave a way and change the landscape of how we do business with everyone in Ontario and Canada.
Our communities want to invest into business economic opportunities. They want to build opportunities for the younger generation coming up. So it's a bigger vision than just bringing a line into the communities.
The federal government has got to come to the table. They've got to help us put these funding frameworks in place. The provincial government's ready. I believe the federal government's ready. We'll see it. The proof will be in the pudding.
There may be a lot of hurdles still to cross, but for John Cutfeet, there's real momentum for this project and real hope for the future.
I think there's a different expectation now in terms of our people having a say in what happens in the territory. I mean, there is a choice, right? And that's the thing that we fought for, is to have that choice, and more power to the people.
That's the video that we show to tell the story to the government people, to the public, the mainstream, about why there is an urgent need for this project. As you will note in the video, some of the numbers are off in terms of number of communities, and so I'll get into that. We had done this about a year ago, and recently there has been additional communities that have joined. I think in our area, most of you that are here, I'm going to be preaching to the choir because you guys know your situation in your communities. But those of you who are not from the First Nations, this little bit of background that I'm going to talk about is for you. Energy has been a long-time issue for our First Nations. In early 1990s, number of communities got together and identified at least 4 regional issues, and one was energy, and they called themselves the G10. I don't know if any of you are familiar with that, but they set themselves up to start talking about the four regional issues. Unfortunately, it fell through. The communities couldn't come together to agree to work together. So from there, we were approached by GoCorp, saying that they're having lots of difficulties with their power in affecting the production of the gold that they're mining in the area. And so there was discussion about how are we going to address energy. And with GoCorp, there is an IBA agreement with 2 tribal councils and 4 First Nations. The directives that we received from those leadership, at that time, they told us it's not, like, energy is not an issue just for 4 communities. It is a regional issue. And they wanted to deal with energy outside of the IBA and invite other First Nations that are having the same problems as their communities. So from there, discussions evolved. I'm going to give you an example in terms of the number of years it took to have First Nations agree to work together. It started in 2008, right up to the partnership agreement that was signed with GoCorp originally and the First Nations in 2012. So it took about 4 years, 5 years, to get the communities together. And at that time, there was only 13 First Nations. I think the videotape explains the situation not only of KI, but other First Nations that are in dire strait with their energy needs. A lot of our communities, the 17 First Nations that we're working with, 16 altogether, their diesel is at capacity. So 10 of them, before we started bringing this issue out, there were 10 communities at capacity with their diesel generators. What does that mean? What that means is that any new housing, any other community infrastructure or development that communities want to do, they can't do because they cannot connect the housing and there's not enough power to do other things that they would like to do. So if there's a power outage, and sometimes there's a power outage in the middle of winter, that compromises the health and safety of our people, that also compromises their shelter, their food, water. And so that affects the daily lives of our people. And unfortunately, our communities are not able to grow, never mind pursue economic or business opportunities. So there is an urgent power supply that's required in northwestern Ontario to connect First Nations to the grid. I'm not going to go into some of the what that means for everywhere else. We've done a number of socioeconomic studies to look at what are some of those benefits for the region, not only for the First Nation, but for Ontario and Canada. For the First Nation, obviously, it'll end the load restrictions. And then, of course, savings of $1 billion to diesel generation. We did a Price Waterhouse Cooper, I never know what they were called. They did a study for us. They looked at the initial business case for the project to see if it's feasible, to see if it's something that could kind of self-finance itself. And also, we also looked at the environmental and health impacts, put a social value to it. So we had hired a HDR, they're called, through PwC to do a socioeconomic research and study. Now, this is an environmental conference, so don't ask me to explain this one. There's a result of whatever dirty air comes from the diesel, there is going to be avoided CO2 equivalent GHG emissions of 6.6 million tons. So I think half of you in this conference are environmental people, so you understand what that means. So one of you can probably get up and explain it better than I can. But what we do know is that it'll provide for cleaner energy, and it'll provide for clean energy. Because right now we're operating with dirty diesel. One of the successful developments, I guess if you want to call it that, this partnership has, is the partnership amongst the First Nations, partnership with industry, and partnership with governments. Our First Nations are not only trying to bring a line to the First Nation. That's just something that needs to happen in order to improve the living conditions of our people. There's a bigger vision that our people have in terms of owning major infrastructure that's going to take place in their homeland. So this project has its mandate. It took a number of years also to bring light to the government. What I mean by that, you will note that in 2009, Ontario government started what they call Integrated Power Supply Planning, or whatever, IPSP they called it. The report that came out at that time, if you take a look at that report, the whole north was orange because there was no plan for the north. Right around that time, we had received directive from our leadership to start looking at energy in the area and bringing transmission grid. So we started working with the government to start bringing the issue that we just saw in the video to their attention, and to start looking at energy seriously for the North. It's been challenging at times because when we started this project, I did not realize that energy was such a complex issue. It's such a highly regulated entity that a lot of people, like myself, has been a huge learning curve and have learned it, and I'm trying to transfer that knowledge and information to our communities so that they can understand it. At the same time, bringing the issues within our First Nations to the government, particularly to the bureaucrats, to senior level government people, has also been challenging because they don't know what actually goes on in the communities and they're not familiar with the situations of our people. Just giving you a little bit of insight as to the work that we're doing. We managed to have this project be a priority within the Ontario Long-Term Energy Plan, and it's been identified in that 2013 report that had been released. Wataynikaneyap is one project with 2 phases. As you will note, there's all sorts of beautiful purple lines up north. That's the line to connect the remote First Nations. And the one below that is the line to Pickle Lake and Red Lake. So in the video, it says that we're connecting 16 First Nations. We are connecting 17 First Nations because recently Bekanjikam First Nation joined Wataynikaneyap, and we're working to connect them to the grid as early as 2018, given their situation, given their need. The corridors that you see are proposed corridors. We've been working with our communities. We go to each First Nation. We showed them the maps initially, I think it was in 2014, 13, that we went to each First Nation, and we had hired Cenis, a consultant, and they kind of looked at the number of options based on whatever methodology they used. It was based on construction costs, the landscape, the topography, and the water bodies. So 3 options were presented to the First Nations. And when we came back out, we had a 4th option because our communities told us where to go and where not to go. And recently we've been going into the communities to kind of, make it narrower, the corridor, which is going to be a 2 kilometer. And then eventually, hopefully, we'll have the width required to build the transmission line, which I understand is 20 feet, 130 feet? I think 130? Okay, Joanne says 130, so I believe him. And so that's the work that we're doing. We have to have a lot of engagement with the communities. It's not complete. Those corridors are not complete. We still have to go back this fall to start talking more about the various corridors, and there's been some changes. Even after we've gone to each community, there's been some changes that have been done from each of our First Nations. And a lot of it is where their harvesting areas are, or where the waterways are, or hunting grounds, burial grounds, sacred sites, all those things that come up. It's a 1,800 kilometer line, 200 kV up to Pickle Lake, and 115 to 44 transmission lines will branch off to the north. It's a 1.35 billion estimated capital cost. And I'm gonna hear a lot of, I already hear it in my mind. This is so much money. It's so costly. What's gonna happen to my hydro bill? What's gonna happen to my tax dollars? I can hear it already. I hear it already. But what you guys must realize is you are already currently paying for the service, for the diesel, the dirty diesel that's being provided to the community. So I tell people, when you look at the 1.35 billion, that's an actual savings. If we were to stay status quo, we're going to save $1 billion. So I tell people that this is a reinvestment of current dollars that are being spent on avoided costs, and also to run the local distribution in the communities using diesel. It's a huge cost, yes, but it's a reinvestment of dollars. When we talked about ownership, the chiefs told us that they just don't want this line to be built by somebody else. They want to own it. And so part of our task, we had a team that was established from the get-go of this project, comprised of tribal council leads and technicians. As you know, with any project, it doesn't come with money, so we had to use existing resources. And thanks to GoCorp, who also assisted us to kind of make way for our people to enable us to move forward on this project. GoCorp was part of that partnership initially. They decided that they're not a transmission company, they're a gold company, so they exited in June of 2015. Is it 15? And when we went to seek for a partner, as you know, any transmission company should have, according to the Ontario Energy Board regulations, transmission company needs to have money. They need to have money. They need to know how to construct, operate, and maintain, and they need to have a license. We didn't have any of that as First Nations. But when we went to seek our partners, we didn't look at those 4 things. The premise of our selecting our partner was to look at, would they enable and support our First Nations in the vision for ownership of a major transmission project that we're building. And yes, we talked to at least 6 major transmission companies in Ontario and even outside of Ontario. We had a process that we set up in terms of how we interviewed, how we talked to them, and we found one partner that was willing to do just what we asked for, and that was Fortis Res. And Fortis is a $28 billion electric gas utility business. Res Canada is a privately held renewable energy storage transmission development. So Fortis Res is the project manager, plus they own 49% of Wataynikaneyap, with an eventual, and 51% is owned by 22 First Nations. The vision there is to own this transmission company 100% over time. So as you know, this is probably one of the models that are in place. It's an unprecedented partnership model, and we're moving forward. We're working on this project 100%, 150%. And so that structure just kind of gives you an idea of what the structure looks like. At the far corner there, those are the communities with their logos. And then the 22 First Nations are in partnership. We recently set up Ubagabuan, which I'll explain what that means later. And the ownership aspect and the project manager kind of just gives you an idea what the structure looks like. Where did this come from? When we go to the community, people still ask us even today, after 8 years of working on this project, they ask us, where did this come from? Whose idea was this? So we always say that it's mandated by the chiefs since 2008. They gave us an order to investigate transmission development and ownership and to connect remote First Nations to the grid. We realized after we started working on this, it wasn't easy as going to Pickle Lake and plugging to the power line, the whole north lights up. It wasn't going to be like that. We found out that that E1C line going towards Deer Falls is 70 years old and barely functions. So there has to be a refurbished line that goes there in order to provide the two mandates that had been given to us by the leadership, which is to connect First Nations to the transmission grid. Over the years, we've had other communities that have joined. In October 2013, 5 of Q8 Nogogamakanek communities joined Wataynikaneyap. February 2015, Sandy Lake First Nation and Wabagoon Lake Ojibwe Nation joined Wataynikaneyap. In August 2016, it's expanded now with Pekanchikam and Lakdamalak being part of Wataynikaneyap. So now we're up to 22 First Nations. There's a lot of engagement that has happened on this project. Not only to the 22 First Nations, there's other First Nations who are not part of this project that were asked to engage. There's 32 First Nations on the list, in addition to the traditional land rights holders, harvesters, that need to be engaged under Phase 1 and Phase 2 EA. We also talk with other Indigenous organizations, political territorial organizations, and of course other interested members, businesses, non-Indigenous land users, and NGOs, and municipalities. We do open houses in the first round. We did open houses in all of the, like Igneous, Dryden, Pickle Lake, Sulakaut. And so we've had a lot of running around and going to the communities. And we've asked communities to come in and present information. And a lot of communities have responded. There are some communities that are still, we're still working with them and dialoguing with them to talk to them about the project. What does Aboriginal community engagement mean? Rather than using consultation from the get-go of this project, because as we know in our First Nations, consultation is like a dirty word. So we had to come up with a word where the meaning may be slightly different in terms of engaging people. And that has to be from the get-go. When we are a proponent, even though we're owned by First Nation, we still are a proponent. And what that means is in Ontario government, if there's a proponent that's developing anything, they have what they call duty to consult delegation. So when that happened, when they asked us to do that, first of all, they gave us what they call an interim delegation letter for Phase 1. And then we had to go back to our leadership because, as you know, our people have Aboriginal treaty rights and inherent rights. And Canada has a relationship, including Ontario, through treaties, and they have a trust obligation and commitment. So being a First Nation proponent, we had to be very careful that we do not compromise those political positions that our people have. We also tell the government that without people's consent, there will be no major development. And I think we all know that. I think we've had experiences and we've seen experiences where First Nations are not part of any project or have not been participating in any way. They haven't been asked. You end up with no project. In terms of the duty to consult delegation, what they've told, the leadership told us is that we need to exercise our due diligence as a proponent, but the ultimate responsibility and obligation stays with the Crown. We also look at each First Nations community protocols and principles and their autonomy. Each community is different, and we go and talk to the Chief and Council to get their blessing in order for us to go into each First Nation. And there are specific protocols that some communities have in terms of how they want to be engaged. And we need to abide by those and work with the First Nations. So there's a lot of work still to be done in that area. Because when you have a business, you can't cut yourself off the knees from the get-go. So there's a balancing act that needs to happen when we deal with that issue. We've always said that this project, we need to start from the ground up. We need to be open, inclusive, and both sides. What I mean both sides is the proponent side plus the leadership side at the community side must take responsibility and exercise due diligence. Because as a proponent, you're trying to engage people on the ground. But if the leadership are saying, sorry, then that's not due diligence, in my view. So I think it takes both sides to talk and to have this information, especially for those harvesters, land users that are going to be impacted by such a major project. We've tried to exceed the regulatory requirements. Normally in each First Nation, you guys receive really thick books. And then your chief has lots of these on his desk or her desk. And they're asked to respond in 30 days or 45 days. And a lot of those are requests for feedback and input into whatever project is happening. Well, we try not to do that. We try to go to each First Nation as much as we can to talk to the communities, to talk to the leadership about the EA process, because we had to send out our terms of reference, which had already been approved. And we do community presentations like this, newsletters, and we have a website. It's www.wataypower.ca. And radio programs, sometimes we go on Wawate, and we continue to engage with First Nations who are directly impacted by this transmission corridor, specifically Mishkigogmang and Saugeen. And we also are engaging, or have engaged, the leadership of the Matawa Council, the Matawa leadership, the chiefs. We have some support resolutions that we've had to get through the political organizations, and we have a resolution from Chiefs of Ontario. We've also been talking to the trappers and land users, and we get the message that they are supportive of this project and that they want to be part of it. So we continue to dialogue. In terms of the project status, we've been studying this project to death. Excuse my terminology, but we've been doing a lot of studies. We've done a business case, a financial model, and a socio-impact analysis. There's two of them that we did. We did kind of like a more of a general high-level one that Lomas Energy did, and we did more of a local, regional through HDR. And we also have completed the terms of reference for phase 1, which was approved. And we've initiated our EA work for phase 2, which is now under Class EA. And we've also received a transmission license in 2015. It had conditions, but those conditions have been lifted when Ontario passed 2 orders in councils in July 2016, prioritizing the connection of remote First Nations, and that Wataynikaneyap be the transmitter to undertake the project. So what are we doing next? We've submitted what we call a deferral account. A deferral account, from what I understand, kind of just outlines categories of what are those expenses that we have in the project development. And so there's various regulatory applications that need to be done. The other one that we're starting to look at now is what we call a leave to construct application, Now that application itself, with the work required, probably will take us about a year. And that's probably being overzealous from what I hear. But other than that, there's timelines that we're working with, and we're starting to work on that. We continue to engage First Nations for best routing, and we are going up to each First Nation again this fall. So if you're from a community and you're part of Wataynikaneyap, we will be coming into your community November, December, late October maybe, November and December. And we also have our board members and our shareholders, the chiefs, who will be meeting first week of November in, to kind of give them an update of where things are at. There's a lot of work we're doing about to make sure that our communities are ready for this major infrastructure that's coming in their way. And what is that benefit that they're going to have from this project? Our communities have been telling us that they want to have meaningful participation and involvement in this project by way of benefiting, not only through menial jobs, but truly benefiting through businesses and whatever other economic initiatives that may present themselves. So we're working on that. We're working on what we call a community readiness planning, which Ministry of Aboriginal Affairs, and I don't know what they're called these days, Ministry of Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation, I think they're called now. They had funded us to do a 2.5-year project to look at assessing what is that need in the community and how are we going to plan and initiate education and training. The other project on the side that we're doing is the local distribution. If you're going to build a transmission line, you have to have somebody to connect to. And right now, what's happening within our area is we have a number of communities that are part of what they call HORSI, Hydro One Remotes Inc. And then we have, I think, within our project, there's 6 or 7 independent power authorities that are part of this project. And independent power authorities are non-regulated entities. In order for a community to be connected to the transmission grid, you have to be a regulated entity. So now we're working with each of our communities to enable them, because it's going to be a number of years of planning that's going to be required in order to bring our communities up to standard in order for them to be connected to the provincial grid. I could probably talk and talk, but anyway, I'm trying to hurry up. Community opportunities, I think there's a lot of community opportunities that will present themselves. There's a return on investment. There's renewable energy projects out there. I think from what I understand, there was 6 run-of-the-rivers out there with about 200 megawatts. Is it 6 or 9? 6 that we had identified. And there's also wind solar projects that are already there. And right now, there's a lot of baseline studies our communities have done on various initiatives. And a lot of these baseline studies would present themselves that they're not feasible because the market base is not there. So therefore, it's very costly for our communities to sustain those initiatives at the community level. If we have a grid, they can sell that power to the provincial system. So that's the work that the communities will want to do or are starting that work currently. There's local community contractors and businesses that we have already. And the discussion that we've been having is why reinvent the wheel? Why should we have to redo everything? Why don't we look at what we have and how can we enhance it and build that capacity in each of our First Nation? So there's some of the initiatives: clearing, construction camps, materials, accommodations, and any kind of business readiness planning. We're also pursuing that, and economic development. So there will be a number of jobs that will be created. So when we do our presentations, you probably heard me say 1,069 jobs, and then as recent is 769 jobs. So I mean, we can't really pinpoint at this time, but there's numbers that have been provided in a lot of the studies that we've done. The vision of our communities through Wataynikaneyap is that they will own, control, and benefit from one of Ontario's biggest projects. This one here says it's 770 jobs. It's gone down by 9 again. Anyway, I don't know who does these numbers, but there's going to be jobs and opportunities presented within Northwestern Ontario and additional jobs during operations. Some of the community opportunities, we have to provide for early training and have our communities be project ready in order to be part of, have a meaningful participation and involvement in this project. And so I've already talked about the community readiness planning that we're doing. And we've also hired our community workers who assist us in this planning. So we have 16 workers in each of the First Nations, and I think Pekanchikam will have their worker too eventually, right? I don't know if we've talked about that, but I'm sure that's going to happen too. And so we have a worker in each of our communities, and we call them the C community. What the heck are they called? Our ERP workers, I call them. Community Energy Coordinators. So, we're also initiating a training program that will begin in 2017. A proposal had been submitted, and there's a pilot project, I think, that's coming online. We recently, the 22 First Nations, the board, there's 22 board members, because each First Nation has one board member, and they needed a company that would provide services that would help them to provide some of the services that we are responsible for. And one of those things that we're working on is the Aboriginal engagement and community engagement, government relations, and also communications. So those are the 3 areas that we're focusing on, and those will be led through each of the tribal councils and Sandy Lake First Nation to ensure that engagement is happening, and also some of us will take lead in the government relations. And our communications officer is John Cutfeet. In the PowerPoint here, it has his number, his email, and also has my office number and my email. And there's a project website if you're really interested in this project and want to know. We provide updates on it regularly. And sorry for being so long-winded. I hope I didn't put you guys to sleep. I didn't hear you say amen over there. So, miigwech, I don't know if there's any questions. Don't be shy.
Margaret, on one of your pages, you'd indicated that there were 770 odd jobs, but only 260 of them were related to positions in Northwestern Ontario. And I'm wondering why there's such a significant difference between those 2 numbers, 200 and some odd being retained in Northwestern Ontario to benefit the communities, and 500 other ones, the total is 770 positions. Is it just because they're contracted positions as compared to full-time positions for the communities?
I'm assuming that's what it is. I can't answer it, but I can take that question back. Joanne, I don't know if you can.
Those numbers come from PwC, so we'd have to ask them.
So the numbers in terms of estimating number of jobs and how many would actually stay in Northwestern Ontario, those numbers came from, I think, was the HDR socioeconomic studies that had happened. Yeah. So some of the technical jobs, I guess there's an assumption that a lot of those are coming from down south. But we also are talking about having a procurement policy where there's going to be Aboriginal content in some of these contracts that will be held. So that's the discussion that we're having at the Wataynikaneyap board level. Vince?
What is Obagabuan's role? What did they have?
Obagabuan is a service company that was set up by the First Nation Limited Partnership. And Obagabuan Services will be kind of like the contract administrator with some of the work that we're doing on community engagement, government relations, and communications. And any other work that we're doing, like the Community Readiness Project and LDC. And is there anything else? I think that's about the 5 areas that we're doing right now. And there's also the Aboriginal participation work that we're doing, the education, training, planning, all those things that we need to continue to work on. So that's their primary role. Sorry, I don't remember your name. David, sorry.
Did I hear correctly that the corridor will be 2 kilometers wide?
That's, I think, initial corridor that we identified in terms of area is 5 kilometers. And then they're delineating it to 2 kilometers in terms of the research area or the study area. And then the actual corridor itself is 130 feet.
Yeah, so the cleared area would be 130 feet. Okay. But to get there, we need to work with the community, starting at 5 kilometers, narrow it down to 2, and then somewhere in there find where that best place for 130
Sure,
130 feet. Yeah.
Cheryl?
Margaret, is it Class A not phase 2 just because of big lines and they're not carrying a lot of electricity? Is that why that's under a different PA process?
No, Class CA, I think there was, we had looked at the definition of the classification of the line, and that's basically what we pushed for. And it's a comprehensive Class CA that we'll be working towards too.
The voltage did play a role. So the lines to Pickle Lake will be 230 kV, and that automatically puts it in the higher category. But the lines going north from there are 15 and 44. 44 are found on the side of the road in some places, so it's much less significant.
So that's going to be enough, you think, for your growing community? You don't need to upgrade?
Based on the current consumption and yeah, that would be enough for each of the communities. But if there's like kind of like a major development that would happen in the area, I don't think we projected those costs. There may have been some based on what Ontario had in their records in terms of mining claims and whatnot. But other than that, from a community perspective, that would be enough. Any other questions? Yeah, you mean I rushed for nothing? Oh, I could have said a lot more things, you know? So this has been a very exciting project. Having 22 First Nations work together on a huge initiative like this, I think is in itself rewarding in every way, because if we can achieve this together as First Nations and setting those opportunities for our future generation, and also protecting for the environment for our future generation is one of the biggest issues that come up in our engagement with communities, and to make sure that there's no major damage done. Any other questions? So if there's no more questions, thank you for listening. We have a number of our board members that are sitting here, and Glenn is one of our board members. He's from Slade Falls. And David is one of our energy workers from North Caribou. And let's see, who else is here? Well, obviously, Brianne and Laura helps with, and Franz. Franz is a very good worker. And he kind of also works on the RERP and the LDC stuff. And Laura Sayers from our office helps Donna work on the EA stuff. And Brianne works on the RERP stuff, the Community Readiness Project. So, and then there's we have a big team of that's working on this. We even have Wanda help us once in a while. She's our note taker at meetings. So anyway, kshmigwech for listening, and I don't want to hold you up for your supper. And if you have any questions at any time, you can call John Cutfeet. No, I'm just kidding. You can either contact us. My cell number is 807-738-1248. That's my contact information. Otherwise, you can get a hold of me at my office, which is 737-2662. And a lot of people say I don't answer my phone, but I'm a very busy woman. So thank you very much.